As you are all aware, trade, and there's no need to demonstrate it any further, is quite a powerful engine for trade and for economic development and growth. If you just look at how the Asian countries have made till today, is essentially on the back of trade. So when we also look at Africa's trades, simple statistics show that back in 1993-94, total African trade was in the tune of $256 billion US. As of December 2013, the total African trade was $1.4 trillion. So there's been quite significant improvement in the volume of trade. But unfortunately, looking in the details, we found out that trade is still largely dominated by commodities. And unless we get into more value addition, we are not going to create the necessary jobs. We are not going to create the necessary value addition for government to raise fiscal and other revenues. So what we are going to try and do in the next 50 minutes that we have here is to look at how trade can be improved through either improvement of the business climate or improvement in the value chain. From African Export-Import Bank perspective, what we've been trying to do in adding value was to introduce new programs and new products in order to address the shortcomings of African trade. I can give a few examples. One of them is in the airline, where we've been financing African airlines in order for them to link more African countries together. So you have a company like Kenya Airways, which benefited from a $2 billion facility. We did finance the Angolan airline, and we also finance the Fly 540 airline. Another product which is to add value is what we call the Africa Cocoa Initiative. The Africa Cocoa Initiative tends to give more value addition to the African cocoa locally in Africa. As you're aware, 4 African countries account for around 80% of the cocoa production output in the world, namely Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, and Cameroon. So we've introduced a program to assist those countries transform more of their cocoa locally. And the third program that I want just to put here before I pass on the floor to my colleagues here, is what we call the Contour, Construction Tourism Relay Facilities. You know, if we are to attract investors in our continent, we need to have the appropriate hotel facilities. The first thing an investor sees when he comes in a country is the hotel where he's staying. And if he's not staying in a hotel that is of international standard, he probably will not come back again. So we have a product which we call Contour, Construction Tourism Relay Facilities. With this product, we've been able to assist African promoters build hotels to international standards. And those hotels are then managed by international firms. So these are the 3 products that I wanted to bring to your knowledge. We have quite an exciting panel here. The first I would like to introduce is Mr. Oliver Niedermeyer, who is the chairman and CEO of Tao Investment Management. I'll right there put the question to Oliver to introduce what they've been doing in the value chain and the global supply chain financing. Please.
Thanks a lot, Jean-Louis. Good morning, everybody. So Tau Investment Management is a private equity firm that's focused on transforming global supply chains and actually has been built for that sole purpose. So my perspective to this is perhaps a little bit differently because we look primarily at global sectors that are laden with inefficiencies, are underbanked by private equity, and can be transformed with a very activist and systematic approach to transforming these supply chains. So talking about, as Annabelle mentioned, integrated solutions, we've been looking early on at pretty much every low-tech manufacturing industry that is labor-intensive, is usually undercapitalized, and has labor and environmental issues leading to workplace disasters and so on. So all of the industries usually private equity would never go to. So we looked at garment manufacturing, we looked at toy manufacturing, furniture manufacturing, consumer electronics, but always with a view, how about if somebody would really invest at scale and in a serial subsector investing manner into these suppliers in developing markets, upgrade them, modernize them, help them actually build the factories of the future, and at the same time plug them back into the supply chains of the Western buyers. Because when you look at big US, European corporations, they actually need not only the race to the bottom in terms of wages, but what they really need is better suppliers, safer suppliers, more reliable suppliers, less suppliers that they can work with. But in a lot of industries, they don't want to invest in these suppliers. So one of the first industries we're tackling and that we're currently focusing on and have done a lot of work over the last 1.5 years on is the garment manufacturing industry. It's quite interesting when I think about Africa right now because obviously the garment industry is very much dominated in Asia from a manufacturing point of view, but there's a lot of talk and a lot of pressure to build up capacity in places like Ethiopia and whatsoever. And I think there's a huge potential here if you do it right. And the fascinating thing is when you look at garment manufacturing as a pretty good first step on the ladder out of poverty for millions of people in places like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, earlier on in China, a lot of good things happened, but obviously a lot of bumps in the road, ultimately leading to tragedies like Rana Plaza, ultimately leading to all the disasters on the workplace and environmental side that are not sustainable. So now when you look at an industry like that with a global sector perspective and you actually build up the relationships with all these brands and retailers, which we have been doing with 50 of them in the US and in Europe, you understand what they really need and you understand how you can actually de-risk your investments because you can secure the demand side. What's interesting, and I think that's very relevant in the Africa context, is and what I would encourage anybody who thinks about garment, textile, leather, and other low-tech manufacturing industries as a way to create employment at scale, I would strongly advise not to go down the route of race to the bottom of the barrel of wages, just because you can deliver right now at half the minimum wage as Bangladesh. Because ultimately, that's not even relevant. When you look at the details of all of this, staff turnover in certain factories in that sector is 8% per month. In good factories, it's actually 2% per month. So when you bridge that and you get it down from 8 to 2%, you can actually double wages and you still have a lower labor cost. A lot of that is true for energy efficiencies, cost savings and water and so on. So just a more systemic solution, integrated solution in a lot of these industries, I think would put Africa and the employment creation here on a much better track.
Thank you very much. Let me pass on now the floor to Annabelle Gonzalez, whom you know already because she was on the first panel. Can you please share with us the World Bank Group new practices and how you'll be engaging with the private sector on the continent and on a broader view on Africa's trade and competitiveness, please? Yeah.
Thank you. I want to bring back some of the ideas that I mentioned before. In particular, this idea that we should both celebrate Africa's decades of growth, But we also need to consider that for this growth to be sustainable, in spite of the increasing headwind challenges, it is important to put in place some integrated solutions. And let me share with you an example of the kind of work that we have been doing, for instance, in Rwanda, which in close collaboration with the World Bank Group has made significant headway in improving its investment climate. But we are also working with Rwanda on trade, on competitiveness, on entrepreneurship, on innovation, because it is that combination of solutions that will result in investments, in jobs, and growth. And very importantly, we're also looking at the regional integration angle, which is crucial for a landlocked country. So let me mention two projects that I think will be relevant. One is we have recently published in collaboration with the East African community, the EAC Common Market Scorecard 2014. The objective of the scorecard is to assess progress toward the development of a common market in capital, services, and goods across the partner states of the East African community. The EIC is a great objective, which, when fully implemented, will result in much greater intra-regional economic activity. What are now 5 countries with different trade and non-trade barriers will become one single market, a huge investment opportunity for the EAC private sector and for foreign investors. And here, I'm very glad to report that we have begun to see very impressive results. I was in Rwanda just a couple of weeks ago, and in discussing with the Minister of the Eastern African Community, we learned that transit time from the port of Mombasa to Kigali has been reduced from 21 days to 5 days. And this is an impressive achievement that can have a very positive impact on trade and on investment. Now, on a smaller scale, but also a good example of sector-specific work, we recently helped the Rwandan government approve a reform of its pricing for green leaf tea. We supported that specific reform because we identified that tea and horticulture more broadly was one area where Rwanda could build its competitiveness, and we looked at what were the key measures that would yield significant results. The new mechanism is expected to increase the earnings of about 60,000 tea farmers and give Rwandan tea a competitive edge. So this reflects some of the integrated solutions that we are trying to put together in our practice, our team, the Trading Competitiveness Global team, and different parts of the World Bank and IFC have also come together to help governments develop dynamic and resilient economies, expand market opportunities, and enable private sector initiative. Now, if you come to think about it, Africa has done a number of things right. One indicator, for instance, is the number of investment climate reforms that Sub-Saharan Africa has registered of lately. In FY13, for example, we counted 64 investment climate reforms in 26 countries. Based on these reforms, many countries in the region have made strong advances in the doing business ranking. Many of them have also moved forward across a wider set of competitiveness measures, such as those measured by the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Index. Since 2006, countries in Sub-Saharan Africa have advanced further on both the Doing Business Report and the Global Competitiveness Index than the global average. Now, there are also, and I probably would say if one has to identify what has not gone right yet, I would say that probably Africa is the continent with the greatest unexploited opportunities. It is both the continent with the highest return on investment and the highest level of investment risks. So we operate in the poorest countries in Africa. In Chad, for example, where exploiting some of these opportunities can impact many lives. Until now, economic growth in Chad has mainly been driven by the oil sector. Agriculture is one of the most promising non-oil sectors and the second source of export earnings in Chad. In collaboration with the government, we have identified the meat value chain specifically as a potential source of growth. To stimulate private investment in the meat sector, we are also working on targeted reforms aiming to improve the business environment, at the rehabilitation of critical public infrastructure, to support the improvement of technical capabilities of workers, and to support also the development of micro projects in the sector. In 1970, Chad was one of the main meat exporters in Central Africa. Today, it only exports live cattle. With this integrated set of solutions, we are aiming to help Chad find its place in the global value chain space. Let me say that I think that more broadly, finding Africa's space in the global value chain is very relevant, because today a lot of the integration in the global economy takes place through global value chains. And we were in Ethiopia as well a couple of weeks ago, and it's very interesting to see that I think that Ethiopia has a great potential to integrate into the light manufacturing in several areas. And we've seen this in the textile and apparel sector, in the leather and manufacturing. And one can discuss, I think it is a question of, yes, improving productivity in agriculture, yes, identifying new drivers of growth, and for instance, the construction sector can certainly be one, but it is also about manufacturing. Africa today is except for a few countries, is not really connected to global value chains in the area of manufacturing. And I think that the potential is there. Again, I saw the will of the Ethiopian government. We are working with them in building the infrastructure, special economic zones. They have the human resources. They have the energy. They will have energy very soon and at good prices, I hope. So there are, I think, opportunities that one needs to look at in greater detail. Many challenges as well, but this one of how to integrate Africa into global value chains is one that we need to continue thinking about because it is the way forward in terms of integrating with the global economy.
No, thank you very much. And it's actually I could see the integrated solution that you're talking about is exactly what Gonzalez have been talking about before. Let me pass on the floor to now Dominique Bourgo, the Senior Manager Business Clim. Can you share with us some of the experiences that you've had on the project that you are overseeing there on the business climate at the EU ACP?
Thank you. So maybe just a short presentation of the program BizClim. It's a program of the ACP group of states, ACP meaning Africa, which is targeting sub-Saharan Africa, Caribbean and Pacific countries, and the European Union. And the program is aiming at improving the business and climate and investment climate in ACP regions. Short presentation we'll make is based on two major elements. The first one is the recommendations of the EU-Africa Business Forum. The fifth edition took place in April last year and gathered about 1,000 people. The second element is the ACP strategy for private sector support that is developed by the ACP Secretariat on behalf of the ACP group of states. The regional economic communities are doing important efforts in improving the business environment. They have done some work, some business environment programs to improve the business environment, and it's the situation of the West African region, of COMESA region, and more recently of the Central African region. But during the forum, there were really two major aspects which were problematic in developing trades, and that's the energy problem and the infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure. The infrastructure increases the lack of transportation facilities, increases the cost of doing business and limits the intra-regional trade and intra-African trade. This aspect of intra-ACP trade and investment is a key component of the ACP maybe with respect to the intra-SCP trade and investment, I would like to mention an example of the Eastern African Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Agriculture in relation to the Northern Corridor. Northern Corridor is a corridor that will be connecting South Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and the DRC. The Chamber of Commerce is making efforts in ensuring that the local private sector will be involved in the construction of the corridor. So they have engaged the local authorities, the regional authority, which is implementing the construction of the corridor. And to make sure that this corridor is not only, the local companies are not only involved into the construction or the construction of the implementation of the corridor, but also in trying to ensure that this transport corridor transforms or becomes an economic corridor where activity is developed along this transport corridor. So the the Chamber of Commerce has engaged the government in order to sensitize them in the need to involve the local companies, also to ensure that the regulatory framework was enabling their participation, and also on the third side, to make sure that these companies were able to participate in the sense that they had the capacity to do so, and they were well aware about the public-private partnership mechanism. Collaborating in such aspect would mainly, or would also need, means that local company will most probably have to work together. And to this respect, I would like to mention the cluster approach, which is useful tool, maybe, in order to make mentalities evolve, and having companies who are used to compete against each other work together in order to achieve common goals. And that would be an objective, for example, to reach greater markets, bigger markets. That would be a possibility to improve the technology they use. And this is specifically targeting SMEs. One of the elements which was considered as an impediment to trade and investment in Africa during the EU-Africa Business Forum, one of the elements mentioned was the vocational training. This aspect was mentioned as or either missing or being inadequate to the needs of the companies. Again, having a collaborative approach through a cluster would, through a grouping of companies, would possibly lead to an improvement of vocational training, in the sense that a grouping of companies could easily relate to the government and to the public or private educational actors in order to improve the vocational training. Final element I would like to mention as a key component also that reduces competitiveness is the access to finance. Developing local financial markets was an element which was tabled, a recommendation which was tabled, with possibly a Pan-African stock exchange market combined to lower caliber stock exchange at African level. The need to create domestic liquidity and long-term liquidity for domestic banks. and specifically targeting the SMEs and the access to finance to SMEs. And this is one of the key elements of the ACP strategy to support the private sector. They want to bridge the gap and to address the needs of the missing middle by using a wide range of financial tools. They also are targeting seed and early stage finance in order to develop, support project promoters and develop various sectors.
Yeah, thank you, Dominique, for sharing with us this experience. I would like to note the infrastructure, which I believe is quite important if you have to develop even the supply chain. The infrastructure is very key. I always like to take the example that I gave personally about a couple of years ago. I was invited in the European Investment Bank, and they were asking what we do for landlocked countries. And unfortunately, they didn't know how I heard this expression, because there is no country that is landlocked. We all know that it's a question of infrastructure. If you unlock it, there is no landlocked country. It doesn't exist. So I asked this nice lady if she was talking about Luxembourg when you were talking about landlocked country. Let me ask George Otieno, who is CEO of African Trade Insurance, to share with us also his own experience on improving the business environment for trade.
Thank you, Chairman. Africa was seen as a destination where it's very risky for investment and trade. So in 2001, some African countries came together through the support of the World Bank to set up African Trade Insurance, in short ATI, to particularly, specifically to provide political risk insurance and trade credit insurance. It was believed that the only way Africa can grow is to increase its trade and also reduce risks relating to investments, which most investors were afraid of. We started with about 7 countries, mostly in the COMESA region. Now we have about 10 countries who are members, including one from West Africa. We are working closely with the ECOWAS Commission now to encourage the other ECOWAS member countries to join. In fact, ECOWAS wanted to set up a similar organization, but now they've agreed to join with ATI to make it a more Pan-African organization. We've found out that the challenges, particularly on credit insurance, is lack of data. It's not easy to get data in Africa, and we are working very much on that. We've developed a system which will provide credit insurance data within Africa. We recently realized that the banking fraternity wants to lend more in Africa, but the lack of cover for them to be able to non-payment covers as well as political risk covers. So we've developed a portfolio cover, particularly for banks, so that they can lend to SMEs. Recently, we are working also closely with the European Union, European Investment Bank, on the Sustainable Energy for All, which is a renewable energy concept, and we are providing guarantees in Africa for renewable energy investments. We, like I said earlier, that the lack of information has been a hindrance for credit. Lucky enough, in some of the African countries now where we're operating, we have credit reference bureaus who are providing information, and we're working very closely to make sure that enough information is available for this kind of, for us to be able to cover the risks in those countries. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Before I pass on the floor to the audience, let me just ask Oliver if you can come up with one or two recommendations, since you have been operating at a very practical level. One or two recommendations that you would like to put to either the World Bank or even African governments as to improve this trade and business environment climate. What would that be?
Well, thank you. I'm pretty sure I'm not qualified whatsoever to give the World Bank any advice or African governments, but let me perhaps just run you through a chain of thought of something that I actually think could help. Pablo Picasso once said, good artists copy, great artists steal. So my colleagues and I were actually very fond of stealing good ideas and applying them to areas where they haven't been applied. Let me take one step, and then I'm going to be very concrete and come back to what you ask. So we steal actually a lot of thinking from good models that work, like I love right now what you can learn from Tesla and the original demise of the electric car, especially in this country, and now the revenge of the electric car. And when you look at what Tesla is achieving in changing the entire car industry, and obviously the fossil fuel issue and whatsoever that's coming with it, it's absolutely fascinating for a company that actually only produces 30 or 40,000 cars and is a niche operator, but they still transform the entire mindset of an industry. So the reason why I'm mentioning that is obviously it's a little bit self-serving, because that's what we think we're doing in supply chains in certain industries. But leaving that self-serving aspect, and apologize for that, aside for a second, when you look at Africa and all of the issues you and all the experts are discussing, obviously it's about transport and logistics. For me, very practical. When it costs me the same amount of money to ship a container for one of our portfolio companies from China to Africa, then it costs me to truck it then another 300 miles to Addis Ababa. There's obviously an issue here, and you have to be hyper competitive to overcome that. But when you look at logistics, transport, when you then look at industrial zones and how you can optimize things like that, which obviously is a huge contribution, as far as I understand it, often in industrial zones, the backlash is you have now the infrastructure, you have the electricity, you have all of that kind of working, but now there's backlash because there's no local employment, things are perhaps not working because nobody knows how to maintain them. So what we're doing right now is we actually do it a little bit differently in our Asian activities. We look to invest in the factories, give them the growth equity to upgrade their existing facilities, and part of that can also be relocating some non-compliant factories that have all the issues on infrastructure and electricity and relocate them to industrial zones, but also take care of the worker training, work with the non-profits on the ground, work with all other partners, with the IFCs of this world to really do this. Now, and thirdly, that leads me to again, integrated solutions, to stick with Annabelle's theme, or big solutions for big problems. When you think it through, then, okay, integrating African manufacturers into the global value chain can be hugely instrumental. Just do it because it is a competitive advantage, and you can actually build a competitive advantage around being located. That's how we look at Ethiopia right now, because we think it can increase the competitive advantage in that industry if we do it. We don't do it because it's $30 right now instead of $68, because that's not going to be sustainable anyway. And the last aspect is really increase all of this and the integration into global value chains with technology. So we're spending a lot of time and money to work on a technology platform for our portfolio and for the buyers to integrate vendor management systems with, on the compliance side, on the ERP side, on the accounting, on the non-financial reporting side, basically into the factory's ERP systems and operation system, because then you can also suddenly secure all kinds of aspects through the chain, through technology.
Thank you. Annabelle, any comment on what you just said?
I think that, there are pros and cons to the different options, and I think that one has to look at them very carefully in the context of a specific country. I believe, special economic zones or export processing zones are second best option in the sense that it is preferable, of course, to get the whole of the business climate right, the whole of the infrastructure right, the whole country right. But sometimes this is a bit more difficult to do. So this spatial solutions are second best alternatives to begin to develop, in particular, a manufacturing sector in a country. I think they provide a number of advantages in terms of making it easier, to implement reform in a smaller space, providing the infrastructure in a smaller space. But having said that, it cannot be disconnected from the country as such. It cannot be disconnected because in many ways the business environment is one. I think it was clearly being said here that, for instance, if an investor arrives at a hotel that does not meet certain standards, very unlikely that the investor will. That's absolutely clear, and that is probably not part of the special economic zone. Now, having said that, there are also things that need to be taken care of. Strengthening linkages with the local economy is normally one that is quite clear. I mean, Oliver was saying that this is a problem in special economic zones, and in most cases it is. So my point is that there are, again, pros and cons. I think that for spearheading manufacturing in certain places, special economic zones may be an alternative. They need to be done in the right way. There are many good stories of success as regards special economic zones, but there are also many stories of failure. And one needs to look at this very carefully to make sure that you're going the right way. And I would like to say that I believe that one very important element of success when talking about special economic zones is a very clear link to the private sector, because the private sector will be able to identify these opportunities in a much more business-like way in many occasions. So to me, this linkage with the private sector is absolutely essential.
Now, let me open the floor for discussion to the audience. You can either raise issues, questions, or make comments, but please introduce yourself and the organization you work with. Yes, the lady here.
Is that working? I'm heading the private sector department of the African Development Bank. My name is Mrs. Diallo. My questions related to burden sharing in terms of financing and how to de-risk trade finance transactions in Africa. Learning from the experience of Asia, when the multilateral development lending institution, the Exim banks, the Export Credit Agency and the Trade Insurance Agency have been working together to address the trade financing of the Asia and the MENA region. That kind of collaboration has not been effective in Africa. In your view, and based on your personal experiences, I mean panel members, what are the concrete actions that could be considered Africa? Thank you.
Another question?
Good morning. My name is Connell Duffy. I'm with Alliant Insurance Services. We are brokers at ATI. And I think it's very interesting in respect of the government side and multilateral agencies providing solutions, but the private markets that provide insurance and support to various transactions in Africa are also a very big part of what you're trying to do here. And the more that you can do, and I'd like to hear what your ideas would be to promote that, I think the more that we're going to see in terms of trade and investment.
Can you speak louder?
In Africa.
Yeah, okay. Can you speak a little louder, please?
Yeah, I was just suggesting that there are a lot of avenues for the multilateral agencies and bilateral agencies to promote trade and investment in Africa. But you're not really going to be able to achieve much unless you bring in the private market insurance agencies, which their volumes and their abilities to do things, their capacity in respect of the broader kinds of cover that they can provide, that's going to make the real difference. And that's been the difference in other parts of the world.
The third one, before we, yes.
My name is Guy Beng. I'm head of the Export Promotion Board of Côte d'Ivoire. My question goes to Madame Gonzalez. What case do we make for SME development in terms of trade and competitiveness? Second question, I'm happy that African Link opened an office in Abidjan. Congratulating. What about ATI? Since we start negotiating, what about your move in West Africa? Thank you.
Okay, we have 3 issues that were raised here. Maybe I will give you the opportunity first, since you have to leave.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you very much. I would like to refer to your question on the small and medium-sized enterprises to say that this is one of the areas in which we work very much in different countries. It is essential, of course, for a well-functioning business sector in a country to have a strong SME sector. It's very important, in particular, for job creation. Now, as we know, SMEs normally face the challenges associated with access to capital, access to technology, access to markets, access to information. So we have programs to work in each of these areas, as well as to connecting SMEs to international markets, where the challenge is even greater, be it through the development of supply chains, and we have some interesting examples again in some of these places, like in the meat sector in Chad, where we are working right now, but also by assisting them in exporting directly. We also work with export promotion organizations, and certainly would be ready to work with you in programs of this nature. So I want to take this opportunity to just excuse myself, because I need to leave. But I have 2 of my colleagues are here in the audience, David Bridgman and John Speaksman, and they'll be glad to respond to any other question that you may have. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Annabelle, for your contribution. Josh, you want to answer the other question before I touch on the one from Mrs.
I'll
Diallo?
attempt to answer maybe all, but not just to give my own view of the questions. For the first question, Ms. Jallo asked, I think maybe the challenge we have in Africa is mainly because we have very few of the agencies we talked about, the ECAs and trade credit insurance and Exim banks. We only have for ECA, maybe we might have 1 or 2 in South Africa. We have ECA. Of course, maybe in North Africa, we have a few, maybe in Egypt and Tunisia, and of course ATI. And the trade credit space as well, compared to maybe in the MENA regions and the East, where you have at least critical mass. So I'm sure they can come together to influence maybe some decisions. On the second question on the which was asked by ATI broker, I believe we in ATI we try to use a private market quite a lot as well. So again, it's a question of a few players in the market who can access the London market, for instance, and but something which I think is quite critical, and it's true that we need to use the private market more also to kind of create more capacity, because there's enough capacity, out there. To Guy Bengi, of course, I'm sure you're quite familiar, and we're quite happy with the assistance you've been giving us to try to get Côte d'Ivoire to join. But the good news is that now, like I said earlier, the ECOWAS Commission has taken up the task of bringing the new members, And I think we've made quite good progress in that direction. In fact, I believe in the next couple of months, we should be coming to Cote d'Ivoire to discuss the specifics on how you should be joining. But I think after this, maybe we can have a one-to-one to discuss that. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, let me also probably add something on what George said about the cooperation between Exim banks and ECAs and etc. One of the key issues we are facing in Africa regarding export credit is that most African countries that are exporting to counterparties that are stronger in terms of risk than the exporter. So it makes the paradigm of an export credit totally different. You see, for US to have an export credit agency is very important because they're exporting to weaker countries. But for an African to have an export credit, it does not always make sense because the party to which the African exporter is exporting is usually, in terms of risk, stronger. So you have countries that have tried, there are very few export credit agencies in our continent from Africa's perspective. I think that's one of the reasons. That being said, we do, from African exporting bank perspective, we do cooperate with a lot of export credit agencies on both sides. One side is to try and bring more capital goods in our continent in order to transform African export sector. As I said at the beginning of this session, although trade has increased in terms of volume, but it is still dominated by commodities. Take simple 4 countries that I mentioned. A country like Ivory Coast, which is my country of origin, when we got independence in 1960, total output of cocoa for Ivory Coast was 80,000 tons. It's currently 1.6 million tons, but less than 20% of it is transformed locally. So you need export credit agencies not to export that cocoa raw, but to have equipment that help you transform that cocoa into a value-added product. So we have an export credit loan facilitation program at the bank, which is working quite well. We currently have in excess of $1 billion worth of line of credit, which we are using to help African economies acquire the equipment and so on. And we'll be more than happy to share more of that experience with the African Development Bank, who has already given us, the Afrexim Bank, a line of credit in order to meet those long-term requirements. On the private insurance, we've started working on them with the imminence of Basel III. We are now using more and more the private insurance market. We have currently a couple of agreements with some private insurance so that we can offload part of the risk that we have on our books in order to create more space on our capital adequacy ratio. We've started working with ATI also on it, but some private insurance on Lloyd's market. And I'm sure it's going to develop a little more over the next few years, given the imminence of Basel III and the impact it will have on the capital of banks in the continent. I take the compliment of Mr. Mbeng, and I thank you for that. I think we come to the end of our session. I promise that I will try and meet the time. So I hope you would join me in thanking our panelists. And I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.